Hi, brothers and sisters. My name is Brad Wilcox, and I've been asked to speak at this New Zealand Education Week. The problem is that I can't be in New Zealand to be there personally with you. So I guess we're going to be doing it kind of long distance. But just because I'm not there with you doesn't mean that I don't love you. I moved to New Zealand for 6 months when I was a young professor here at BYU. I directed a study abroad program there. I'll never forget the ward that we lived in, the bishop that we had, the members of the church there that became such dear friends for me. In New Zealand, that's where my son first started taking seminary. And it was so funny because we got down there and he said, "I'm not waking up early." I said, "No, Dave." I said, "Russell, this is what you do in the church." He says, "Well, no, I'll just take it during the day like they do in Utah." I said, "No, it's not offered during the day. So you're getting up early." And I had told him originally that I wouldn't let him drive the car down there because you drive on the left side of the road. And he was just getting his driver's license. But I made a deal with him that if he would go to seminary and wake up early, I'd let him drive. So he actually did better than I did driving on the left side of the road because he wasn't full of all the bad habits that I learned for years driving on the right side of the road. But he went to seminary, and his seminary teacher was an enthusiastic returned missionary who just filled him with passion for the gospel. There were only 3 or 4 students in the class, which made Russell feel like his opinion mattered. It made him feel like his presence mattered. It made him feel like if he wasn't there, he would be missed. So I look back and I see my own son's beginnings of his testimony coming from New Zealand. I also remember being in New Zealand during 9/11. That's the year that happened, was when we were down there. And I'll never forget the outpouring of love that we felt from the saints for us, for our country, for the hurt that we were feeling, and for the students from Brigham Young University who were there working in the schools. We just felt such an outpouring of love and felt so grateful to be surrounded by that when we were far from home at a time that was very traumatic for some of those kids. So, yes, I have wonderful memories of New Zealand. I remember being there when Lord of the Rings first had its premiere in Auckland, and now the whole world knows about Lord of the Rings and Hobbits, and they all associate that with New Zealand, but we were there when that was just first coming out. I've returned to New Zealand many times. I returned to speak at Time Out for Women events. Maybe some of you have met me there. I remember going and speaking at the MTC there. I remember going and speaking to some of the missions there, and being at young single adult conferences and youth conferences. Now the church is doing FSY, not only internationally, but throughout North America. This is brand new. And I remember being a part of some of the very first FSYs, even before they were called that. We called them TFYs, Time for Youth. We also called them SMYCs, Special Multi-Stake Youth Conferences. But I remember being there in New Zealand with those. I remember being at Church College and participating in some of those youth conferences that set a pattern and that set a standard for the youth experiences that young people are going to have throughout the entire church. So yeah, New Zealand has led the way in many, many ways. But I guess the thing that I love most about New Zealand is hokey pokey ice cream. So, sorry, that's the one thing I'm not getting. I can't be there to get some hokey pokey ice cream. But I sure wish I were, because I love it. And I love you, and I'm grateful that you've decided to gather. I'm grateful that you're having an Education Week experience in New Zealand. Feel my love, feel my support. And let's talk a little bit about grace, and let's talk a little bit about the atonement of Jesus Christ. This is a study that was done here at BYU. It was done by Dan Judd and some of his colleagues. Dan Judd is now the Dean of Religious Education at Brigham Young University. And in this study that was published in the American Psychological Association journal, they reported a study they did with 635 Latter-day Saint university students. And they found that those who understood grace had lower levels of depression, lower levels of anxiety, lower levels of perfectionism, lower levels of scrupulosity, or feeling like you always have something to confess, and lower levels of shame. Wow! This isn't a drug that we're talking about. This is a doctrine. Elder Boyd Packer said that doctrine understood can change behavior, even faster than a study of behavior can change behavior. Now, these are serious issues in our time. In the United States, the current generation is getting a nickname. They're calling them Generation Vexed, V-E-X-E-D, vexed, because they have so many issues with depression, so many issues with anxiety, so many issues with suicidal thoughts and tendencies. Now, you may not be having the same extent of a problem in New Zealand, but I think you probably are having some of the same issues. And we have a solution that makes a difference, and that is understanding the doctrine of grace. Grace, the power that flows from the atonement of Jesus Christ. I was asked to speak to some primary children about grace, and I thought, oh, how am I going to do that? I mean, I'm used to teaching adults on this topic, but how do I teach children? And finally I had a bright idea. I thought, I'll give them all a hymn book, and we'll have a little race, and we'll see who can find the word grace in the hymn book the quickest. Well, I passed out the hymn books. We said 1, 2, 3, go, and we got started. Pretty quickly, one of the boys said, hey, I found it. I said, wonderful. What hymn is it in? He said, Called to Serve. Called to serve him, and the King of Glory. He said, I've sung that hymn a lot, and I don't remember grace being in that hymn. He says, well, it's right here. And he holds up the book, and he points to the bottom of the page where we all found out that the hymn was written by Sister Grace Gordon. One of the teachers said, that puts a whole new twist on being saved by grace. Maybe these kids thought that Grace Gordon would show up in a superhero costume and save the day. But I don't think kids are the only ones who don't understand that word or that phrase. What does grace mean? And what does it mean to be saved by grace? Let's talk about it. Grace is one of those crazy words in English that has many different meanings. It can mean elegance and beauty. She is a graceful woman. It can mean kindness or courtesy. Treat your guests with grace. It can mean a title like Your Grace. It can be a prayer. We're saying grace. It can also be a salutation like we read in the New Testament. Grace be unto you. With all those definitions, maybe it will help us if we go back to the original Hebrew, which was translated as grace. And that word means goodwill or favor, given with compassion. No wonder Christians grab that word to describe God's goodwill, God's favor, given with God's compassion. But Latter-day Saints understand that grace is not just a description of God's attributes. It's also a description of how He engages with us, how He invites us to engage with Him as we strive to make those attributes our own. Listen to the definition that was given to us by Elder Uchtdorf. He says, grace is the divine assistance and endowment of strength divine assistance, endowment of strength, by which we grow from the flawed and limited beings we are now into exalted beings. So grace is the power he gives us to make us strong. It's the divine help he gives us to make us divine. When I was younger, I used to always think that grace was somehow waiting for me, like at a finish line. I had to crawl on my hands and knees. I had to be scraping. I had to have my dirt under the fingernails. I had to be right on my last leg. And then when I crossed the finish line, somehow grace would be there. Now I understand that grace is the power that surrounds me here and now. It's not waiting for me at the finish line. It's the power that gets me to the finish line. When I was younger, I used to think that somehow Jesus' grace supplemented my works, or my works somehow supplemented Jesus' grace, as if we had to meet some sort of minimum height requirement to get to heaven. But now I understand, as Elder Uchtdorf taught, that it's not about height. It's about growth. So instead of speaking so often about his part and my part, I speak about his heart. I speak about my heart, loving each other and being conformed to the same image. When we speak of a covenant in the church, we sometimes hear the definition, a two-way promise. That's absolutely correct. But when we state it like that, too often we look at a covenant as a contract. I do my part, he does his part. But then that can fill us with discouragement because we never feel like we can do our part. Well, all you have to do is keep the commandments. Oh yeah, that's all you have to do. Just keep the commandments, all of them. And all you have to do is endure to the end. Oh yeah, that's all you have to do. Endure to the end. Keep all the commandments all the time. And then when we fall short, we think, now I've blown it. I haven't done my part, so now Jesus won't do his part, as if he's looking for us to make a mistake so that he doesn't have to deliver. That's contract thinking. Get that thinking out of your mind. Truman Madsen once said, a covenant is not a cold contract between party A and party B. A covenant is a warm relationship between two friends who are on, catch the word and think of the temple, a first name basis. Wow. That gives us a whole new view of covenants. Have you ever heard somebody say, well, I'm not getting baptized because if I get baptized, then I'm making promises to do stuff and I won't be able to do it. And so I'm actually more noble. I'm actually being better if I just don't get baptized, because then I'm not being a hypocrite. Maybe you've heard people say that. Maybe you've heard people say, well, I'm not going to go to the temple because then I have to make covenants. And if I break those covenants, then I'm worse off than if I'd never made the covenants in the first place. What's revealed by this kind of thinking? Contract mentality. Well, I don't want to sign the dotted line because the minute I sign the dotted line, then I have to live up to the contract. And if I can't live up to the contract, then I'm better off not signing because then I'm not liable. Contract. Since when is anybody worse off by having a relationship with Jesus Christ? Since when is anybody worse off by having a relationship with God? When we think of that covenant as a relationship, then suddenly we're not in this contract mentality, but rather we're in a relationship where God's help is not outside of our reach, where God is willing to help us and lift us and transform us throughout the entire perfecting process. He's willing to be there. I'm not working for him, I'm working with him. And that makes a huge difference in the way that I interact with him, the way that I move forward. That makes a huge difference. Now, right here, I want to read what Elder D. Todd Christofferson has said. We do not need to achieve some minimum level of capacity or goodness before God will help. See, we don't have to do our part so that he will do his part. Divine aid can be ours every hour of every day, no matter where we are in the path of obedience. Wow, once I realize that, then I know that I'm working together with God, together with Christ, and that I can do this. It's not all on my shoulders. Our very nature. I know a young man who joined the church in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, for those of you who don't know much about the United States, Las Vegas is called Sin City. It's a place that's well known for its gambling, well known for its organized crime, well known for its prostitution. It also has good buffets, by the way, but we won't go there. It's a pretty sinful place. And this young man was growing up in the middle of all of that, and he wanted to investigate churches. His stepfather was mad at him. Said, "What are you going to churches for? You're a young man. You're supposed to be drinking and smoking pot and sleeping with girls. Why the heck are you going to churches?" Well, he ended up investigating the Church of Jesus Christ, and when he ended up joining, his dad was so mad at him, he kicked him out of the house. Well, you know the drill. Family in the ward took him in, helped him get ready for his mission. A year after his baptism, he ended up getting called to Japan, and he was in the MTC, and he wrote me a letter that said something like this. Some general authority just came and told us we're supposed to love our parents. That's a hard one for me. How am I supposed to love someone that I don't even like? How am I supposed to love a man that I don't even respect? How am I supposed to love somebody that I hope I never see again? And then he wrote this. I guess for me right now, love is going to have to mean that I feel sorry for him, and that I won't give up hope that he can change. That's grace. When your heart says, I can't love, and heaven says, I'll help you. When your heart says, I can't forgive, and heaven says, I'll give you the strength. When your heart says, I can't break this bad habit, and heaven says, try one more time. That's grace. That's when we see this refining process. That's when we see this sanctifying process. That's when we see this enabling power that changes our very hearts. That's grace. Now we sing a hymn in the church that says, I stand all amazed at the love Jesus offers me, confused at the grace that so fully he proffers me. It's a beautiful hymn. When Charles Gabriel wrote the hymn, the word confused didn't just mean I don't get it or baffled. The word confused could also mean standing in awe. Standing in awe of the grace, the enabling power, that so fully he proffers me. Now that's another word we don't use very often. We use the word offer. I can offer you this book that's kind of not bound right now. But I can offer this to you. But you would have to come get it. If I proffer it to you, then I'm putting the prefix pro onto offer. And I'm making proffer. It means I'm proactively offering. It means, man, I am giving this to you. I'm putting it right in your hands. I'm making it almost impossible for you to refuse it. That's the difference. Think of the emblems of the sacrament. In many churches, the emblems are offered to the congregation. People come forward to receive them, but not in our church. In our church, the emblems are proffered to us. They are literally placed in our hands, even when we're late and in the foyer. And don't ask me how I know that. But even then, the emblems are proffered to us, given us in such a way that we stand amazed at how freely Christ gives this gift. It's unearned, it's unmerited, it's undeserved. It's just a gift. But he must stand a little amazed himself at how few people there are in the world who are willing to pick up those emblems and internalize them. How few people there are in the world who are willing to receive the gift that he is giving them. In the scriptures, in Doctrine and Covenants, section 88:33, we read, "For what doth it profit a man if a gift is bestowed upon him, and he receive not the gift? Behold, he rejoices not in that which is given to him, neither rejoices in him who is the giver of the gift." So yes, grace is given as a gift, but it's a gift that we have to receive. It's a gift that we have to take advantage of. Think about gifts you've been given in the past. Maybe you're thinking about a fruit bread or a fruit cake. I think about that. My aunt used to always make fruit cakes for us at Christmas time. And we'd smile and say thank you, and then we'd toss them out because they were so heavy and thick. And we'd just toss them out. We didn't receive her gift. I remember when my mom used to make some shirts for me, and I'd say thank you, and then I'd shove them in the back of my closet because I thought, no way, I'm not wearing that to high school. I mean, she put a lot of love in those shirts, but they were not the coolest thing to be wearing. And I didn't receive the gift. We can tell if somebody receives a gift by whether they're using the gift. So think about grace like a scholarship. It's a gift. It's not a student loan. Doesn't have to be paid back. It's a gift. But it's a gift that's given with the expectation that you're going to use this gift. That you're not going to just let it slide out of your hands. You're going to use it to become better educated. A scholarship does not guarantee learning. And a scholarship does not guarantee graduation. And a scholarship certainly doesn't guarantee an education. It facilitates it. It opens the door. It makes it possible if you will but choose to take advantage of the gift. And when we choose to receive the gift, then he can give us more. Those who aren't members of the church always say, well, you Latter-day Saints believe more in works than in grace. You believe more in works, keeping the commandments, making covenants. You believe more in works than in faith. They don't realize that our faith is so strong that the works and the commandment keeping grows out of that faith. We don't do it in place of the faith. Rather, it grows from the faith. We don't make and keep covenants because we don't believe in grace. We make and keep covenants because that's how we receive grace. And that's how we use it. That's how we acknowledge it and appreciate it. And it's how we invite more and more grace into our lives. I remember a sister who went through the temple for the first time. And when I asked her how she felt about it, she said, well, I'm actually a little disappointed because I really wish it had been more focused on the atonement. What? It sounded to me like she was saying, I just walked through a forest and I wish I'd seen a tree. How did she miss it? But then I realized, maybe she was expecting to see portrayals of Christ bleeding in Gethsemane, suffering on the cross, rising from the empty tomb. Maybe she was thinking of that, and instead she saw the story of Adam and Eve. Elder Bruce C. Hafen and his wife Marie wrote a book called The Contrite Spirit, and in the book they said this: the endowment is not to teach us how Christ gave us the atonement. It's to teach us how Adam and Eve and all of us receive the atonement. And we receive the atonement by covenant. As we enter into that covenant relationship, then we allow Christ's grace to make a difference in our lives. And the more grace we receive, the more He is willing to give us. Listen to these scriptures. Doctrine and Covenants 71. For unto him that receiveth, it shall be given more abundantly, even power. Look at 2 Nephi 28. But from him, or from them that shall say, we have enough, from them shall be taken away even that which they have. Wow. Now I used to be confused whenever we talk about power, because I thought, wow, we talk about the light of Christ, we talk about the Spirit, we talk about the power of the Spirit, we talk about grace as power, we talk about the power of the priesthood, we talk about being endowed in the temple with power. I couldn't figure out where one power ended and where another power started. And then I read this verse in Doctrine and Covenants 8:7. There is no power save power of God. So then it hit me that all these different descriptions of power are not different powers, but rather different levels of the same power. And as we receive one level, then we can receive more. And He will give us more and more, even from grace to grace, until we receive a fullness. As it says in Doctrine and Covenants 93:13. So that leads us to Matthew 25 and the parable of the talents. My daughter Whitney, she was just in first grade when we lived over in New Zealand. She went to school in Auckland, had her little school uniform, had her little school house, and all those fun things that they do there. And in fact, the kids used to corner her at recess. And maybe she wasn't in first grade. I think she might have been a little older than that. Maybe she was in second grade. I can't even remember. Anyway, they'd corner her at recess and they'd say, talk, talk. And she'd say, why? And they'd say, because we like your accent. We want to hear your accent. And she says, no, you're the one with the accent. You're the one who talks with an accent. And they'd just laugh and laugh. Anyway, Whitney, a grown woman now, a mother of a baby, and a wife with a husband, she says to me one day, Dad, I was reading in Matthew 25 about the parable of the talents, and I think it's a parable about grace. I said, no, honey, it's about money. I know these things. I teach this stuff. It's about money. Talents were money. She says, Dad, read it again. So I did. And with the lens that she'd given me, suddenly I saw where she was coming from. And I started looking at talents not so much as money or gifts and abilities, but rather as books. One of the first things I do when my grandkids are born is I read them a book. Now everybody thinks it's funny because there I sit in the hospital with a little baby on my lap reading a book. They think it's funny because the book is usually bigger than the baby. But I know it's not funny. I know it's good. I know it's right. I know it's smart. Because I want that baby surrounded with books and language and love right from day one. So I tuck that baby in my arm and I read a book. Well, now some of my little grandkids are old enough to read books to me. And when they do, I give them another book. If they read one book, I'll give them another book. And when they read that book, I'll give them another book. And I keep giving books to them as they keep reading the books. Now think of the parable of the talents. Unto one he gave 5 talents, or books. Unto another 4 talents, or 2. It was 2 talents, or 2 books. And to another 1 talent, 1 book. Now the first 2 read their books. So he said, well done. Because you've been faithful over a few books, I will give you more. Enter into my library. The other servant, who only had 1 book, he ended up taking the book away. Why? Because he's being mean? No. It's because the servant already discarded it. The servant already cast it aside. What good is a book to someone who refuses to read it? I think there are some people who are listening to this who know the pain of giving away a copy of the Book of Mormon only to have it rejected. That choice says a lot more about the person making it than it does about the book or the missionary. Even if God loves that servant, even if God says, gosh, you're my child, I love you, enter into my library. Even if you didn't read your book, enter into my library. Is the servant even going to want to be there? If the servant can't handle 1 book, how's the servant going to handle the library? It's not an issue of whether God wants to bless this servant. It's that he can't. He can't give him more until he has used what he has given. Here's one more scripture that I think you'll find interesting. It comes from 2 Nephi 28. I will give unto the children of men line upon line, precept upon precept. And blessed are those who hearken unto my precepts, and lend an ear to my counsel. For they shall learn wisdom. For unto him that receiveth, I will give more. Line upon line, precept upon precept, book upon book, grace to grace. And as we receive, then we're inviting more and more grace into our lives. So how do you respond when somebody says, have you been saved by grace? I hope we know that the answer is yes. Yes, absolutely. With great gratitude, 100%, completely. No fine print. Yes, yes, yes. If we're going to have a discussion with non-members about that phrase, perhaps the thing we should be discussing isn't the word grace. Believe it or not, that is common ground. Maybe the word we should be discussing is salvation. Have you been saved by grace? That's where we're different. Because for many Christians, salvation is just getting to the other side of heaven. It's just getting to the other side of the wall. I met a lady in the South in the United States, and she said, I'm going to slip St. Peter at 20 and slide on through. And that was her idea of grace. She's going to get into heaven. But we understand so much more. For us, it's not just about getting to heaven. It's about becoming heavenly. It's not just about getting back to God. It's about becoming more like Him. We often hear people describe the atonement with great emotion because they say they're so thankful for what Jesus has done for them, and they see His suffering as being a favor, something He did for them so that they wouldn't have to do it. But when Latter-day Saints speak of the atonement, we're not speaking just of a favor Christ did for us. We're speaking of an investment that He made in us. If the atonement is just about life after death, why did we live? Why did we choose to live in the first place? If the atonement is just about getting back to God, why did we leave? We were with Him. Why did we leave? If the atonement is just about forgiveness for sins, what gets us to the point where we don't want to keep sinning? If the atonement's just a get out of jail free card, if it's just an excuse if it's just permission to procrastinate and an excuse to sin, then whatever changes us to the point that we don't want to keep living that way. If the atonement is just consolation during trials and support during hard times, then why do we have to go through those trials in the first place? Why do we have to face those hard times? All of those aspects of the atonement, as beautiful as they are, can only come into focus and can only come into true clarity as we recognize an additional aspect of the atonement, and that is transformation. Sherry Dew says grace is the power that the atonement makes possible for us. It's the power that the atonement opens up in our lives. Without the atonement, we would have no access to this power. But because of the atonement, we access that power. And in that covenant relationship, we can become better. Have you been saved by grace? I've been asked that question a million times. And usually I just ask a question in return. Have you been changed by grace? Because for us, salvation is not this big. For us, salvation is this big. And it includes being transformed from earthly to divine, from mortal to immortal, from unholy to holy. That's a huge salvation. Some people say in the church, well, we're saved by grace, we're exalted by works. In other words, we're resurrected by grace, but we go back to celestial kingdom by our works. No, no, no. No. Both of those salvations we cannot do without the grace of Jesus Christ. We are completely dependent on Christ's grace to save us from our fallen state and the consequences of that fall. And we are completely dependent on Him to change us, to make us better, to make us holy. Elder Holland spoke in General Conference once, and he compared us to a big choir. I don't know if you remember that talk, but he said we're all like a big choir. And he mentioned the sopranos, the altos, the baritones, and the basses. I have a friend who sings tenor in the Tabernacle Choir, and he got offended. He said, he left out the tenors. Man, he says, I'm going to have a sit-in. In that talk, Elder Holland said something that has always stuck in my mind. He said, come as you are, but don't expect to stay that way. Come as you are, but don't expect to stay that way. Because the minute you come, the minute you're willing to receive, Christ is willing to give. And the minute you receive that, He will give more and more and more, and you will be changed. I went to the Kirtland Temple for a young single adult conference in Kirtland, and it was great. They had a dance, and they had their food, and they had their workshops and everything, but they also got to go to the historic sites and see the missionaries as the missionaries would testify of the miracles that happened there. And we went to the Kirtland Temple on Sunday, the last day of the conference, and the young single adults had a chance to have a sacrament meeting right in the Kirtland Temple. Wow, that was cool. Now, if you're not aware, we don't own the Kirtland Temple. That belongs to another church called the Community of Christ. So, I don't know who knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who could pull strings with somebody to get us permission to have a sacrament service there. But we did. And it was wonderful. We sang the Spirit of God like a fire is burning in the very place that it burned. Right there. And we were able to hear talks. And I was able to speak right there. And I said to the young people, look at the woodwork. Look at the woodwork around the windows. Look at the woodwork around the pillars. Look at the woodwork on the pulpits and the letters that were carved. I said, you can see that these early saints just gave their whole hearts to this building. They gave their whole hearts to God. They were trying so hard to build something that was wonderful. But they weren't very good at it. They weren't very professional builders. They had good hearts, but they had limited resources, and they had limited ability. You know who was in charge of building the Kirtland Temple? Hiram Smith. What did Hiram Smith know about building a temple, building a building that size? So they made some mistakes. Earlier in the conference, they had taken me down into the basement of the Kirtland Temple and shown me the support beams that were laid incorrectly. They were laid horizontally instead of vertically. Now, if you're building and you have a 2x4, you're going to lay it the 2-way, because that can support more weight than if you lay it the 4-way. That's going to bend easier. Well, they had laid all the support beams incorrectly, and they had laid them very far apart from each other because they were stretching their resources. They were so far apart from each other that under the heaviest part of the building, the pulpits, no support beams. What? Seriously, no support beams. Now they have them. Oh, now they've got these steel reinforced things with hydraulic lifts, and I mean, now it's all set. But in its day, they're lucky they didn't sing the Spirit of God like a whoosh and just fall right through the floor. But here's the point I made with those young single adults. The flaws did not keep Christ from coming. And the flaws did not keep Christ from acknowledging that building as his. And where there was weakness, he gave strength. And he turned that flawed building into a holy temple. And that's what he wants to do with us. That's what he's trying to do with us. We just have to be patient with ourselves, patient with our wayward children, patient with our relatives and friends, patient with other members of the church as we're all going through that change process, because it doesn't always happen instantly. Elder Neil A. Maxwell said, there's no such thing as an instant Christian. It's a process that takes time. Why? Because God can't change us in a moment. He changed water to wine like that. So he can't change us in the same way. Well, I guess he could. Except water doesn't have free will. Water doesn't have to want to change. And we do. Your kids do. Your friends do. Your spouses do. Your other members of the church that you go to church with do. That makes it different. I guess he could change us in an instant, but he knows that change without challenge is not change. And he knows that strength too easily won is not strength. So, time becomes the medium through which the power of the atonement of Christ is made manifest in our lives. Time becomes the medium through which the power of Christ's atonement is made manifest in our lives. I got a letter from a kid in the MTC, and he said, "Where's God? Where's God when I need him the most? Why has he abandoned me?" And I wrote him back and I said, "What are you talking about? You're in the MTC. God lives there. He just visits everywhere else. What do you mean, where's God?" He writes back and he says, "I have been here for 3 weeks and I still don't speak Spanish." Now, do you see what he wants? He wants change, but he wants it now. I wrote him back and I said, "Look, when you were a little baby, you didn't learn English in 3 weeks. It took a lot longer. So be patient. Hang in there. Keep trying. You're going to be fine. God will help you." He writes me back and he says, "Don't we believe in the gift of tongues?" Do you see what he wants? He wants change. He wants poof. He wants Harry Potter style. Poof. Wave a magic wand. Enchilada. Burrito. Taco. You speak Espanol. That's what he wants. I wrote him back and I said, "Yes, we believe in the gift of tongues. And sometimes in church history, that's been instantaneous. But usually, it's just a gift that takes time. It's a change that takes time. Time is actually necessary for the gift to be part of who we are. See, God doesn't care whether that missionary can fake it for a few days. He doesn't just want that missionary to know how to say, "Where's the bathroom?" He doesn't want that missionary to look like he knows Spanish to impress everybody. He wants him to know it. He wants him to know it well enough to teach the gospel. He wants him to be able to answer people's most heartfelt questions in Spanish. So, it takes time. And in the same way, he changes us from day to day, from week to week, and from weakness to weakness, from grace to grace. He changes us. And we just have to be patient. We just have to hang in there. We just have to stay in our covenant relationship with him. Now, I'll just end with one last story. Story that comes from my high school years. I joined the debate team. And I don't know why, because I really wasn't very good at it. But I joined, well, I do know why. Some girls talked me into it. Sisters, you just have no idea the power you have in your lives. Because these girls said, "Hey Brad, why don't you join the debate team so you can hang out with us?" And I'm like, okay. And I joined the debate team. And then I'd go to these competitions around the state. On Saturday, we'd go there, and then we'd get on a school bus and we'd be driving home. And we'd get bored, so we'd play a little game. The game was called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I don't know if that rings any bells to you, but we'd clap our hands on our legs, clap our hands together, and then click our fingers. So you get a little rhythm going, and then when you click your fingers, you're supposed to say somebody else's name, Matthew, or somebody else's number, 3, and then the person who had that number would then have to say somebody else's name or number. I mean, I think you get the idea. And if somebody makes a mistake, then he goes to the back of the line and everybody moves up. Well, we're playing this game, and our knees are all turned to the center aisle of the bus, and we're playing this game, and I'm moving up. And I'm thinking, whoa, I'm going to win this thing. This is awesome, man. I'm going to win. I'm going to be right up the front of the bus. And then pretty soon, somebody calls my name or my number, and then my brain freezes, and I go, and then everybody laughs, and then I go to the back of the bus, and then I spend about 5 minutes saying, "This game is stupid, and anybody who likes this game is stupid." And I kind of sang that song for a while, and then I'd start moving up again. And then I'd think, okay, this time, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do this thing. I didn't do it last time, I blew it, but this time I'm going to do it. And then I'd start moving up, but sure as you're born, somebody would say my number, my name, and I would blow it, and I'd go to the back of the bus. Now here's what I can see now that I couldn't see then. No matter where I was on the bus was still moving me forward. Even when I got sent to the back of the bus was still taking me home. The only way I can really mess myself up is by getting off the bus. So what do when we say, "I'll never do it again," and then we do it? What do you do when you say, "No, I swear, I'll never do it again," and then you do it? What do you do when you say, "Pinky promise, I'll never do it again"? I don't know, do you have pinky promise in New Zealand? I saw a deacon in a beehive fighting the other day over which is stronger, pinky promise or Scout's honor. I said, it doesn't matter, because you're going to break both of them. So, what do you do when you break pinky promise? What do you do when you break Scout's honor? What do you do when you struggle with covenants made before God, angels, and witnesses? You stay on the bus, and you trust that Christ will get us home. You stay on the bus, and even when you feel like you're in the very back, you stay there and you trust that that covenant relationship is going to keep moving you forward and keep getting you where you really need to be. I bear my testimony that grace is not a prize for the perfect. It is not a reward for the righteous. It is not a gift for the worthy. It is the source of worthiness. It is the source of righteousness. It is the power that gets us through the whole perfecting process. And I testify that Jesus Christ is real. He's not a painting. He's not a statue. He's real. And I testify that His grace, this power that we're talking about, is not a lucky charm. It's not self-fulfilled prophecy. It's not Milan's lucky cricket. It's real. And I testify that His atonement, the suffering that makes that gift of grace possible, is real. It's not a myth. It's not a folk tale. It's real. And it makes a real difference in our lives. Please feel my love, even though I'm not with you in New Zealand, even though I'd love to be. Please know that I am so proud of you for choosing to be part of something like Education Week. And please feel my support, feel my love, feel my friendship, and please feel the sincerity with which I bear my testimony to you today. And I do it in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.